have you back again on the Orthodox Conundrum podcast.
Oh, it's absolutely delightful. We had such a great time the last two times we were on.
Absolutely. It's been too long. Rav Yaakov, I'm entering this podcast much more unprepared than I normally am for an interview. You told me you have a new Shita, Child Safety 2.0, a new way of looking at preventing child abuse. And you want to add some of the elements that you said are currently missing from much child abuse prevention. So to start, can you tell me the normal way that parents have been using or should be using to prevent child abuse, how they're taught, if they're taught at all? How is that normally done? And then we can talk about what's changed.
Okay, sure. Thank you. And then thank you for the opportunity. I'm really looking forward to jamming with you. I wouldn't say missing. The child safety, what I call 1.0, that the children are getting, thank God, in schools and in communities and in preschools and from the doctors and from the parents. It's fulsome. It's really solid. It's good. It's research based. It has all the information that children need. The lessons that no secrets from parents, good touching, bad touching, your body belongs to you. Nobody has the right to make you feel uncomfortable. Come to your parents. So that's absolutely perfect, appropriate, and really well done. It's incredible to think that just 10 short years ago, this was considered a very radical thing to do, So thankfully that's become very mainstream and I believe that kids are much safer today as a result. In fact, if you look at most of the scandals, unfortunately, that come forward, it's all old things that have been going on for years. You don't really find situations that much that you hear that started in the last couple of years. Although you could make
Fortunately, there are
exceptions. That doesn't come out for a long period of time.
Right.
But the 2.0 thinking is that I think there are enhancements. Okay, that should be implemented, understood first, and then thought about and become part of this bigger package. When I grew up, everybody was using instant coffee. Okay, no one ordered a skinny macchiato or whatever it is, right? So we have to up our game a little bit and understand that there are parts there. There are certain almost assumptions that are made. For example, that children communicate with parents. One of the things is no secret source. If you have anything, tell me, right? That's what we're telling our children.
Of course.
How many teenagers really talk to their parents about things that are uncomfortable?
You're saying the problem might be even communication in the first place. You're presupposing that there's communication going on. The lines might be closed, though.
Exactly. That one of the high profile situations here in the States was in one of the school handled it magnificently. There was an administrator in the school was setting up phony communication. You remember? You heard about it?
No, I haven't.
He was a school administrator was setting up social media accounts pretending to be an Orthodox girl, and they would send pictures to some of the boys. He was targeting the boys in his school. And it was really a horrible situation. He was sending pictures and then send me a picture back. And then gradually they would up the inappropriateness of the pictures. And sooner or later, the boys would get bugged out and they would say, see you later. And they say, I'm going to post everything you sent me online.
So the administrator would say that.
The administrator would say that posing as the girl. Now, how did he get caught? The kid went to the parents. Now, I was thinking to myself, my God, wonderful parents. Could you imagine, Scott, that conversation? Just imagine, Rep. Scott, that conversation. Mom, Dad, I've been sending pictures.
I've been sending, inappropriate pictures to a girl online. I need your help. That's not a conversation most kids would have with their parents.
That's what I'm saying. And they were caught because one of the kids was comfortable talking to their parents. So that's like just a huge area about child safety. It's almost assumed that now when you're speaking to 4-year-old kids, it's easy. So that's part, you teach little kids, but those kids aren't going to be kids forever. And even younger children are made to feel very uncomfortable when it happens. It's very strange to them. I don't mean to be crude, but a lot of times, especially, they feel a sense of pleasure from this horrible situation and they're confused and it's very complicated. Right. So that's one thing.
I've spoken to people, there's a concept of arousal, but arousal is not
desired.
undesired arousal.
Right, exactly. So it's confusing to them. They feel so. I mean, if you're listening, if you were putting odds in Vegas that the average 12-year-old kid is going to be comfortable talking to his or her parents about that, you get pretty steep odds on that.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the whole area of barriers to understand why people don't report. How does Walder get away with it to 25 years or whatever that was? And there are barriers that we have to believing stories like this. There's the halo effect, which we when we meet someone that we respect, we tend to give them the benefit of the doubt many times. There's the just world hypothesis, it's called, that people want to believe that the world is a just place. We don't want to believe that we live in a world where people can do horrible things like this.
Right.
And I saw, Reb Scott, some fascinating research a month or two ago that that the just world hypothesis is more pronounced in communities of faith, all faiths.
Really?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Well, it makes sense. You believe in a good world and a good God.
Exactly. And you believe in what we call din v'dayan, right? That there's a judge and there's justice. So it's more difficult for people of faith to believe that that this stuff goes on. And I'm sorry?
Especially if the person doing it is supposed to be a faith leader.
A person, a faith leader, right? Exactly. So what I'm saying is, when they teach child safety education, there are components of this that we should know to broaden our understanding of what's going on. There are a whole issue of barriers. I don't know if you know, I started producing and releasing an under a minute parenting clip every day. I've been doing it since June. So we're up to 250 already, Kanara. I love it. I mean, I did it to engage with millennials and Gen Z parents who aren't doing Facebook. So I opened an Instagram account, and it was a very big life change for me to get into the world, because you're laughing too much, Reb Scott. What's so
I think
funny?
You should open up a TikTok account. That's what I really want to see.
Yeah, not yet, one at a time. But I realized that the majority of children today are being raised by that demographic, and I didn't understand them, and they don't know who I am. I don't get them. And I said, I got to get this. I studied a lot of research, and I said that this is something, if I want to stay in the game, then I need to engage with them. So
what other things are there that we need to overcome, aside from, you said, communication and barriers? Are there other problems that we haven't necessarily addressed in the past?
I think those are the biggest ones. Those are the biggest ones, to understand the grooming process. I didn't mention that. Okay, that's probably one of the huge ones, to understand how these folks operate. Okay, how do they operate? What do they do? What's the MO? So as part of this Child Safety 2.0, I did some interviews this last week and this week. I interviewed Shauna Aronson, I'm sure you know, who's to talk about situational awareness. All of these things were things I thought are necessary to think about. Situational awareness in the Army, it says, look around, know where you are, know where the dangers are. So she was fantastic. She spoke about what parents should know about that. I had, we interviewed Dr. Solomon, Michael Solomon. He's a researcher and a thinker and a psychiatrist, one of the leaders, and he wrote several books on child sexual abuse. And we talked about the grooming process and how they work. And he taught, I learned things during the interview. He was talking, this is fascinating. He was talking about an inverse pyramid, how the abusers start grooming the community first.
Trying to convince the community that they are a respectable person, a person that can be trusted?
Right. That's part. And that they're doing things that are a little different sometimes, to give them that, in other words, I work one-on-one with kids, and I in addition to, they want to earn their respect, and they try to give themselves some leeway. If people see something, they'll know that this is what we do.
In other words, this person's totally respectable. He's a little strange. He does some things that are a little bit different, but that's just who he is. He's a great guy.
That's who he is. And by the way, my number one recommendation for parents to read in terms of understanding the grooming process is Malcolm Gladwell's magnificent article in New Yorker magazine. It's called In Plain View. It's a 5,500 word essay in New Yorker magazine. And that, what that talks about is exactly the grooming process. And he analyzed Penn State. That's when he wrote the piece.
With Joe Paterno and that whole situation there.
Paterno,
Jerry
Sandusky. How did Sandusky get away with it? And one of the things that he said is Sandusky acted goofy. He would bullwhip. He would roll up like a teenager would do. He would do kooky things. And when he did strange things with children, like horseplay with them or other things like that, they said, that's just Jerry being Jerry.
Rav Yaakov, I have to ask you something and interrupt. I'm sorry.
Please.
Something which I've seen, and I'm not in any way casting aspersions on anyone in particular. If anyone has anyone in mind, that's not what I'm saying. So in yeshivot here in Israel, and I used to work in yeshivot, I used to run a yeshiva, many, if not most yeshivot, have one or two rabbis who are the crazy guy. He does all sorts of weird stuff, and that's just who he is, and all the guys love him. How do we know? And I realize I'm sort of getting off topic and focusing on this. How do we know when it's just the crazy character in the yeshiva who's wonderful versus a guy who's actually doing something sinister?
I asked Dr. Solomon just that. I asked him that. I asked him, you know, we've both been educators all our life. So, you know, both our ears perked up. I asked him a better question. I said, if you look at the profile of what today is called, if you look, just Google search grooming activities, it basically describes the superstar Rebbe in yeshiva 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. That's what I told him. I said, I did those things also. I took kids out for Slurpees. I would go for walks with kids. I would never do it today. You know, I didn't hug the kids, but I would, you know, put an arm around them. Every single thing that you call grooming activities is what a great Rebbe was. I asked him that. So he said, if somebody says, I'm spending time with, not alone.
Is that the key point? It can't ever be alone?
It's partially alone. It's partially the fact that some of those grooming activities should not be done anymore. And I do workshops, Reb Scott, with staff. I do workshops with faculty about boundaries, about establishing those boundaries and how those things have changed. And folks my age, I'm 62. I think I have a couple of years on you.
I'm 51, a little bit.
What? I'm sorry?
I'm 51, so.
Big difference. So 51, meaning if a Rebbe is 51 today, they started changing these things 10 years ago, 12 years ago, maybe in Israel a little bit later. But my generation of Rebbeim, we've done this all our lives. I call it, they don't get the memo. You know, they didn't get the memo. And sometimes that causes incredible problems because they're teaching parents of Generation Z kids who grew up with this. And the parents,
and they know to look out for it. And now they're going to say that guy's acting like a groomer. He's like
yep. And I tell the Rabbi, I said, you're playing with your lives.
That leads to another question of Yaakov. And once again, I'm sorry to fixate on this point.
By the way, I would fit this profile. Spends time with children, works with kids at risk. I mean, bang, 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 bang. So in fact, I mentioned to him, I did a workshop with Dr. Pelkowitz. A woman got on during Q&A after the Walder thing. She says, how can I trust you and Dr. Pelkowitz?
Okay, what's the answer?
And she apologized 12 times. I said, don't apologize. That's what you're supposed to ask. So I said, if trust means you think I'm an ethical person, trust me. If trust means you send your 12-year-old daughter in the car with me, don't trust me. Mm-hmm. If I'm doing bar mitzvah lessons with your son or tutoring your son alone, don't trust me. That's
so here's another question for you about grooming. When you describe this inverse pyramid, or Malcolm Gladwell describes the inverse pyramid, and all the things
that was Dr. Solomon. He doesn't do that. That was Dr. Solomon's Kiddush.
Dr. Solomon, excuse me.
Yeah, no, sure. I just want to tell you, if you look it up, I'm posting those videos now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So is a person who's grooming the kids, does he even necessarily know that he's doing that? I'm sure there are cases where the person does. Is it always true? Or is it times that a person is doing the things that make him, so to speak, a good Rebbe or whatever, and then falls into this?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant the abusers.
I mean the abuser. Does the abuser sometimes not start off doing that, but he's doing grooming activities which eventually lead him to follow his Yetzer Hara, so to speak? Or is he always very conscious of what he's doing?
They know exactly what they're doing. And part of the reason that they do this is they're preparing themselves. They're preparing their defense in advance. They're preparing their defense, not only if they get caught, but if people notice things. Okay, so if I don't know the details of Walder at all, but I guarantee you that there were a lot of really weird things that he was doing in terms of boundaries, in terms of yichud. We know he seduced married women. Like, how did he get away with that? What's he doing having single? I would never meet with a woman in 100 years. I wouldn't meet with a woman alone. So it's a question of boundaries. It's a question of noticing these things. And it's a question of being self-aware. That's the 2.0. That's exactly, Rav Scott. This is what I have in mind. The fact to realize that 30-40% of abusers are family members. So when you come into Pesach, this is not part of the regular package 1.0. You're coming to Pesach, I say, thank God it's only family. Keep your eyes open, folks.
Yeah, you mentioned that number yesterday. You said that Dr. Solomon said that 40% of abusers are family members. I found that shocking.
Extended family members. 10%
it's still shocking.
Parents.
It's unbelievable.
That's the theory of the just world. Now feel it on you, Rav Scott. Feel this, own it, right? You say, I don't want to believe that family members can do this. I don't want to believe that grandparents, God forbid, are assaulting their granddaughters. I'm doing a talk with Dr. Aviva Goldstein Wednesday as part of the 2.0 series. You know what the title is? And I decided to go polite, but the title is Sheltered is Wonderful, Naive is Dangerous. With teenage girls and preteen girls. And it's everything. You're setting up your house. You have company. What's your plan with your daughters? Do they have locks on their bedrooms? Do they lock their rooms at night? If you're building a new home or if you're moving to a place, do you have a place where the guests sleep in a secluded area of the? I know in Israel it's harder because the places are smaller, and you have to decide whether you should have guests at home then, whether your sons should bring their friends over for Shabbos if you have grown girls at home and they don't have their own bathroom and their own area like that. I was a scholar in residence in Edison, New Jersey 2 weeks ago. I never go to a home if I don't have a private bathroom. I don't share a bathroom with anyone ever, ever, ever. That was a mishigas, a boundary that my wife and I decided. We talk about it all the time because, you get emotionally involved. You're trying to help people, and sometimes you don't realize you're putting yourself in a situation that it could get uncomfortable. So we have to think differently, right? You said it. You don't believe with the percentages. This is research. This isn't Yankee Horowitz just picking stuff out of his head. Dr. Solomon did research on this.
I remember you told me a couple of years ago when we first talked about this, how I think you were saying with your own granddaughters, you say, if you don't like something I'm doing, if you don't want me to touch you, you have. It's such a strange thing. Don't want to touch Zadie, but that's how it works. You have to respect that. It's have to give Zadie a kiss. No, it doesn't work like that. And you taught me that.
Right. So I say that's not only touching. I give them rides. I give them horsey ride. I make a fool out of myself. You'll see. You make a moron out of yourself like everybody else.
I already do.
So I read the kids. Look. With their own children, 30 years. I read the kids' bedtime stories, right? Always on top of the covers and always with space, always, all the years. But even let's say I'm horse playing with the kids. And I always say, if you don't like, if Zaidi does anything that you're not comfortable with, please tell me and I'll stop right away. And they've said lots of different things. Nothing, the first time a grandchild of mine told it to me was I was reading The Three Little Pigs. And when my kids were young, I used to go huff and puff and I would blow on the kids,
right,
and blow their hair around, And I will never forget it. He was 3 years old. It was the night of Shavuos. And I before I went to shul, I wanted to read him a good night story. And I had read him the night before. And he said, Zaidi, I don't like when you blow on my face. He told me I could tell you if I don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
And
wow.
So it's innocent.
Great.
It's nothing. What?
That's great.
And what a fantastic message that I'm modeling for him, that not only with other people, even me, who loves you, I'm a grandfather, I'm part of your family. It's okay. Tell me something you don't like. And on a dime, I'll stop right away.
I have a similar story, but almost the flip side of it with my youngest daughter. Her name is Batsheva, and she's 12 now. And only a couple of years ago, I realized that there was a problem in the way that we play. Again, horseplay, fooling around.
Right.
And if let's say I'm tickling her or whatever it might be, she would often say to
exactly.
me, no. And she would say no as a joke. And I realized eventually, I said, you know what, Batsheva, we have to change the way we're doing this. If you say no, I am going to stop.
That's it.
Even to this day, sometimes and she'll say no, and she'll say, oh, no, I meant, I said, Batsheva, when you say no, that's it. It's over. It. We're done.
Right.
And it's almost the flip side of what you just said.
And I just started taking questions on Instagram. Like people send me a message under 100 words, and I respond in an under a minute clip. And someone said, I go to my daughter's complaining that my father-in-law gives sloppy kisses, and she doesn't like it. And, we were telling her, come on, it's AD, don't make him feel bad, whatever. I said, tell him no. Mm-hmm. And if he doesn't stop, don't go to the house. You tell him, wow, you can't go to the house. This is different. We're teaching the children. I know you don't mean anything, God forbid. And I know, but if she can't say no to you, if she can't say, in other words, if she tells her parents, Zadie's making me uncomfortable, and we take her back to that situation, then there's no child safety.
You mentioned communication, you mentioned barriers, Rabbi Yaakov, you mentioned grooming. These are all things that are problematic behaviors, that are reasons that child safety teaching doesn't necessarily work, or education doesn't work. So in Child Safety 2.0, how do we make sure that, or do our best to keep people safe? If kids aren't communicating with their parents, or the barriers are up to prevent us from being able to see it, how do we overcome those barriers or that gap in communication?
Be mindful about it. It's just that be mindful. I started to tell you about the clips. I do a minute. I do under a minute clip a day. This week, the topic is Tell Me Anything. It's at Bright Beginnings Forum. It's called Tell Me Anything. That's the topic of the week. And I'm going through what last week was cognitive dissonance, to talk about the other things, the theory of the just world, to break that cognitive. In other words, look, you and I know about this. We talked about it. You just said, I don't believe that it's 10%, or that it's 40% in the family, right? Dr. Michael Solomon is telling you that it is. Right. Because, and I got news for you. I'm telling you about it, and I don't believe. Part of me doesn't believe it. I have a hard time, even saying this in public. But we know that that's the fact. So how do you overcome it? You learn about it, you study it, it becomes part of your thinking, and at least you have a hope that when it hits you, you can recognize it. That's the important part.
What about the communication issue? You mentioned before that kids often aren't talking to their parents. It's one thing to say you can tell me anything, but let's use the example you mentioned before. That child or teenager who went to his parents when the administrator was pretending he was a girl in school or a girl outside of school, most kids wouldn't have that ability. That I'm not going to call it strength of character. I'm not sure what to call it. They're too embarrassed, and for understandable reasons. That's not a matter of the way I think. That's a matter of my kids just not going to tell me that.
I do a 1-hour class called Tell Me Anything. There are techniques. I mean, the simplest, there's some research on it, but one way of doing it anecdotally is just think of, you and I quickly do this, Reb Scott. I'm your dad, you did something wrong, you stole money from a friend, and you want to figure out how to make it right. Okay, what do you do now? Why would you not tell me? Just list the reasons. You got the pen and paper, you take your notes, go ahead.
I'm going to get in trouble.
You're
going to get mad at me, and I'm going to disappoint you, and I hate disappointing my dad.
2, go ahead.
There are going to be all sorts of consequences beyond 3. What I can imagine. Yeah, right. Etc. We can keep going.
Right?
Yes.
I might not keep your confidentiality if it's something that you did with some friends, right? These are the things. One at a time. That's the answer. You got to eliminate the barrier. It's as simple and as complicated as that. So that's what I do during the workshops. I tell the people, I tell the folks, look, these are the barriers. Why don't you self-identify? Forget Yankee. You just what you did now. And then I'll say to yourself, okay, you want to get rid of the barriers? What did you tell me? Go ahead. You said that you don't want to be, we don't want to get punished. You say, look, anything you tell me, I won't punish you for. We'll talk about. but I'm not going to do a classical punishment. Yes, I'll be disappointed, but I love you and I want to be part of your life and I want to be a hands-on parent. And I'd be much more disappointed if you didn't tell me. That's what my wife and I told the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And just any other barrier that comes your way, just think about what it is, how confidentiality. If you tell me and ask me not to tell anyone, if no one's life's in danger, I'll keep it confidential. My wife and I actually, even when the kids were growing up, we told the kids, we just thought of it one day. We told the kids that they can tell one of us and ask that one not to tell the other. And we gave them our word that we would keep that confidentiality, and we did, and they did tell us many, many, many times. In fact, it was unusual that they told us both. So things that required a strong stomach lining, they told me usually because of the work I promise you, because they knew I don't scare easily. And most of the other stuff they told my wife because she spent incredible amounts of time with them. She's a great mother, so they told her.
What you're saying now reminds me a bit of what you said about Purim, the idea of when kids go out, the no questions asked. If you are in trouble, you need a ride, I'm not going to ask any questions. I will come pick you up, because the consequence of saying, yes, I'm going to ask questions means they won't call you. And chas v'shalom, it could be in a drunk driving accident or who knows what.
I know kids who really, because they couldn't come home, they were afraid to come home. They're drunk, they were sleeping on, and they have 6 hours. Where are they going to go? Imagine. Purim night, it's 1 a.m, or any night, kid goes through Shalom Zachar, gets smashed, right? Who's he going to tell? Imagine what they do. Think about what they would do if they can't come home. And people, by the way, I tell parents to tell the kids, you tell them, we're not going to talk about it for 48 hours, for 24 hours, for 12 hours. You go to sleep, sweetheart, we'll talk in the morning. It's okay. And we'll talk, we'll have discussions about it. We'll talk about strategies to stop it from happening. But I'm not going to punish you. I'm not going to talk to you about it right away. Just come home, sweetheart. I say, you know what the line is? Your life is more important than our rules. That's really the message. We give you rules, what we want you to do. But, and I think I had the opportunity, I mentioned that I would love to meet those parents, and someone said, the parents would be glad to meet with you. I said, no. They were thinking of offering the parents the opportunity. I said, no. But you know what those best practices are. You know that they thought about, excellence you don't meander your way to excellence. I'm sure that they thought about it, and they thought about those barriers, and they said, we want this type of relationship with our children, and we're going to do something about it. So this concept of 2.0, again, it's not that anything's missing in 1.0, but 1.0 is a basic, that's the ground level, that's the minimum. But there's so much more that needs to be learned. And as we're discussing these 4, 5, 6 things, the questions that you bring up other questions, right? And bring up other, like this, if, for example, with talking to children. So this is what, as I see it, this is the next step. Chaim Walder would probably not have been stopped with 1.0 stuff. Possibly not, because he was grooming the kids and he was identifying which ones aren't talking to their parents. So and by the way, we didn't even talk about protocols. That's one of the things I asked Dr. Solomon.
What do you mean by protocols? In what sense?
Protocols means you mentioned about the yeshiva, the Rabbi, that the goofy Rabbi in yeshiva. The goofy Rabbi, right?
The character.
Protocols means that institutions talk about this in advance and talk about what you could or can't do, and everybody knows that becomes part of the rule book. Go to Young Israel of Woodmere's website. Dr. Solomon actually did it. I interviewed Dr. Solomon because I know about Young Israel of Woodmere's work in this. They had 8 years ago already, they did the protocols. So where are bar mitzvah lessons done? If a child is in shul, where do they go during Kriyas Torah, during Torah reading? Where do they go? Are they allowed to be unsupervised in shul? What's the rule for youth leaders? What are they supposed to do or don't do with the kids? So when if you don't have these guidelines, someone's going to either an innocent person is going to be accused of something, or a lot of crazy, inappropriate, dangerous, or abusive activity is going to go on because you're slipping between the cracks. If you announce this stuff, protocols would have caught Walder, I believe.
Right.
If Bnei Brak had protocols that women don't go see men, in an office alone, and children don't go to therapists alone, I believe he would have had to stop or curtail or been caught.
Well, that's where a lot of what you're saying now, they sort of go up against each other, because the protocols protect for the regular person, but the kooky rabbi, well, he's fine because that's just what he does. He's just a little bit different. So if
he's rolling his eyes and making funny voices, that's okay. But if he's taking kids in his car out for Slurpees, then it's not okay. So it's not in the protocols. You could roll your eyes and make goofy jokes and mimic the Rosh Yeshiva's mustachmuz, to get a laugh. But there was a very big scandal in Israel. Remember a few years ago, there was a principal of someone who had 4 seminaries, and he sold it, got rid, whatever. He was exposed.
Yes.
I spoke to some of the folks in the schools there. He was picking up girls 1:00 in the morning from seminary and taking them out for whatever, kotzefet or whatever it is. And I asked one, whoa, how did this happen? People say, that's what he does.
That's what he does, right?
And look how effective he is. Look how he turns the kids around. That's what they say. I have a picture of Nehemiah Weberman. Remember that one?
Yes, yes, of course.
In Williamsburg, sitting on 2 bar stools having an ice cream with a 16-year-old girl. Nehemiah Weberman. Imagine if Yankee Horowitz did that. Imagine if I waltzed into Williamsburg and I sat down with Hasidish, a local girl. But he was the dream worker. I mean, you look, Reb Scott, when you take this body of knowledge, this 2.0 body of knowledge, and you analyze all the high-profile cases, it's check, 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 check.
Yeah, no, I see that. I mean, what also bothers me is, and I admit this goes beyond simple matters of child abuse in the most overt sense, but you said something before, he's the dream worker, he's the miracle worker. There are teachers, and even if it's not a matter of abuse, and maybe I'm getting off topic here, but even when it's not a matter of abuse, there are teachers who do strange things, and some people get hurt. It may not be sexual abuse, but they get hurt emotionally. Right. And people say, yeah, but look at all the good that his method has done for other people. And viscerally, I say that can't be. You can't sacrifice one kid's emotional well-being for the 99 kids you're Makarev. I just can't accept that, even though I hear that all the time.
Right. Whether you talk to them about how they're Averis and they're going to burn in hell for this, or, other things like that. But I assume that's what you're talking about.
Yes, things like that and the like.
Right. Yes. Or replacing parents, teaching children that, this whole mindset that you go off to yeshiva. And I always tell parents, be very wary of teachers who try to drive a wedge between you and the children. I always tell my students, you talk to your parents, come back, we'll talk to you. Did you speak to your parents about this? I used to joke with the parents when I never gave high school advice unless parents looked at 3 schools themselves. That was the rule. And because I told them, this is I promise you, I used to say this in public. I said, no one says Kaddish for the Manal. I promise you, I used to say this in public. I would tell the parents, look, your kids, you're used to me, that I work with you and I don't do end runs about you. Be wary in the future. Don't send your children to places where the head becomes
replaces the parents in the kids' lives.
Yeah. Right. If you see that, run for the hills. I used to tell them that, so it's all, look, Rev Scott, if we don't change our practice, we're going to keep having these tragedies. So I'm agreeing
with you completely. I'm on the same page. You mentioned before the rabbis or the administrators who haven't gotten the memo. And part of the problem is not just that they haven't gotten the memo, it's that so many
memo wasn't sent.
First of all, the memo wasn't sent. And also, let's say you're one of these administrators who does miracle work. He's a dream worker for 90% of the kids. So that means that 90% of the parents are saying this guy's a miracle worker, and it just moves in a cycle. It doesn't change. It's a catch-22. Right. You can't get out of it. Right.
So look, we have to be more sophisticated. What I'm doing next, I'm doing a talk, my talk. I'm interviewing them on different talks. My talk is called Abuse Rates Are Not the Same in All Communities. How Safe is Yours? And I know I'm going to get a lot of heat. You know what I'm doing, Rip Scott? I'm making a form for parents, a self-analysis of how safe your community is. And I'm putting it all out there so that parents can have the information. The way I see it, look, it's subjective. It's Yankee Horowitz wrote it. Right. But I think it'll ring true to people. And I think some communities will do very well and some won't. And I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of pushback. I don't care. I really don't care. At this stage in my life, I work with everybody. You know, I'm not rude to anyone. I'm a collaborative person. But at this stage in my life, I'm much more concerned about things I don't say that I should.
Maybe that's why you moved to Deerfield Beach, to get out of Dodge.
Do you know, in 2007, I was very, very concerned that parents were sending kids to Israel that weren't ready to go.
You mean after high school?
I'm sorry?
You mean after high school?
Or during high school.
Or during high school.
Like for kids who were really out of control.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, till the late 90s, the people who went to Eretz Yisrael were steiging. There were no schools for at-risk kids in Israel.
Right.
Then there was a lot of talk about at-risk kids. They started opening more programs, and everybody knew someone who went to Israel on drugs and came back with his tzitzis out. So when parents had
he might still be on drugs, but tzitzis are out.
Touche. So a few of us in the field, we talked to each other and we started, I said, look, let's talk about it. We spoke about it. I wrote articles. So please don't send you, because zero. It was absolutely, totally ineffective. I was a total loser. I did not do my job. I was not successful in convincing anyone because parents were under stress and they saw it. So Horowitz says, no, he's a worry. He thinks, you know. So after thinking about it a long time, I made a chart. I made a self-assessment sheet. And I said, my son is 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So the first one was 5 points. The last one was 0 points. It was a risk assessment.
Mm-hmm, okay.
My son is not learning at all. You know, he's a very poor learner, all the way at the bottom to a great learner. My son rejects authority. You know, he's okay with authority, but he doesn't like it. Average. I probably 10 things I put down there. Learning disabilities. My son has hobbies is better than if he doesn't have hobbies. If he has vices, there were 10 things. And I said, you add this up yourself. Leave me out of this. I'm giving you the way I would assess this.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot tell you how effective it was. Much more effective than dozens of things I ever wrote about the subject.
It's not about someone telling them what to do. It's when they can tell themselves and see themselves and assess it themselves. That's when the effectiveness kicks in.
And I'm doing the exact same thing for child safety. Does your child's school have protocols? Are abusers reported to the authorities? Do abusers get professional help? Are victims comfortable coming forward? You know, stuff like that. And I'm going to list overall factors. Do children go to the mikveh unattended? Are kids hitchhiking? You know, I know in Israel it's a big thing, but right. In Muncie they're hitchhiking all the time. And I've been screaming at the top of my lungs for 15 years about it. If you go to an average community that doesn't do this, if an adult pulls over to the curb and a kid gets into the car, they immediately call the police. Right? If you see a kid on the corner, you go driving in Wichita, Kansas, and there's a kid hanging on the corner and an adult pulls over and the kid goes in. Immediately, they call the police, they put on an Amber Alert. In Muncie, nobody does anything because that's what they do. And I went to the police chief. I said, why aren't you charging the people? He says, your rabbis will kill me. He said, everybody's doing it. He said, he didn't say this. I heard this from a police chief in a different municipality. I asked him a question. He says, look, we can't love your kids more than you do. I promise you. We can't love your kids more than you do. You want to stop it?
That's an indictment
What?
there. That's an indictment.
I got this same thing with the drugs. I went to them and begged them to arrest the from drug dealers. A guy in Brooklyn told it to me. He said, we picked up the guys, and I started writing about it in 1998. I went to the Me'etzes Gedolei Authority. They told me that they're right from, we have to report them to the police. And I went to the police after. I said, why aren't you picking up the kids? He said, Rabbi, we pick up the kids. Before we get to the precinct, one of your rabbis is calling us and saying he's the son of so-and-so, please let him out. So he said, come on, you got to want this. We're here to police what you want. We can't do more than, he said, we can't love the kids more than you do.
That's terrible.
So I'm writing Mamalosh very politely. This is a very big step for me, Scott. Reb Scott. I thought about this a very long time. I've been wanting to do this for about 10 years to let the parents know what I feel, how I feel. And they could ignore me. They could say Horowitz is whatever, but I feel a responsibility to get it. I'm actually putting together an Excel spreadsheet that I can send it to parents so they can make, I'm not good at this. I'm getting somebody to do it now. So you can assign points for it, and it adds up to 100, and you can see where your community is doing. I'm telling you again, it's not going to make me popular in certain places, but I don't care.
Okay, Rabbi Yaakov, I have two more questions before we go. The first one is something you told me yesterday. You mentioned in a WhatsApp voice note that Pesach is a very high-risk time. That's your quote, a very high-risk time. Why is Pesach of all times a high-risk time? Is it simply because there are a lot of family members over and the 40% number again, or is it something else?
Well, think of it this way. You have a 10-year-old daughter, right? She goes to school, comes home. On the back of an envelope, how many adults and how many, let's say, older children does she have contact with in a regular school week?
Very few.
Right? Just figure regular school week. How many adults outside your parents and kids?
Parents and teachers, that's really it.
And what percentage of that time is she in the supervised setting? In a structured setting?
She's almost entirely structured.
Now, do one day of Pesach ask the same question?
Right.
It's a magnitude, dozens of times more people, and totally unstructured time. And just think of the Pesach Seder night in a hotel program or in a family. You have a large extended family, right? The kids are sleeping in 4 different houses by neighbors. Just.
Right. Okay. I hear it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I hear you. It makes sense. It's a little bit scary, or a lot scary, but it makes sense.
I'd rather people be concerned now than horrified later.
That's for sure. And my final question is, if people want to learn more about Child Safety 2.0 to get some of the materials you're talking about, whether the checklist, the self-assessment, or anything else, some of your books, how can they be in contact with you? How can they find that?
So the best place, I do almost most of the things I do on Instagram. It's at Yaakov Horowitz is at my address. And I do daily parenting clips on at Bright Beginnings Forum on Instagram. I'm at Yaakov Horowitz on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. Our clips are available through a WhatsApp group. On the clips, you can message 845-540-2414, and you get our clips every day. I have a YouTube channel at Yaakov Horowitz, and you can subscribe to, and I have an email list that you can subscribe to. I'm just thinking I don't have. You have to really get a link to it, but that my stuff is mostly on social media now. And, we also have a special, we're doing a program now to try to get a child safety book in every home. And Stuart, people can go to childsafetybook.org for all the information. We're doing a huge deal with ArtScroll, our partner on the English book. We're giving giving the book at $5 the book with free shipping in the continental US for orders of over 100 books. We have an Amazon page. If you do a Google search for Let's Stay Safe One of the things that'll come up is I'll send you the link to the Amazon page. And we have it in Israel also. You can, on that site, we're selling the book in Israel for 10 shekel now for bulk orders. You can contact Stuart Schnee, and at that site, childsafetybook.org. And if anybody wants to join my email list, why don't you there's a message place there. You can go to childsafetybook.org and send a message. I'd like to join Rabbi Horowitz's email list. That's probably the easiest way that you can get to, to get to all of this content. And parents, keep your eyes open. That's all. Just keep learning. With wisdom comes power. The more you learn, the title of the series is "The More You Learn, the safer they'll be." The more you know, the safer they'll be.
Well, Yaakov Horowitz, I have to say, I have very mixed feelings about talking with you because every time I talk with you, we talk about very scary, and I shouldn't say every time. We also talked about learning Gemara, which was lovely. But when we talk about these issues, we talk about very scary issues that are not fun to talk about. But on the other hand, I love talking with you. So it is a pleasure talking with you regardless. And I really appreciate your coming on the podcast today.
With pleasure, real pleasure. Scott, be well. A good gewencht Jahr. Have a Chag Kosher v'Sameach. Thank you very much. I hope everybody found it thought-provoking.
Thank you.